This story it's a real cautionary tale. It's about that indie to arena pipeline we hear so much about. It's the story of a band that completely defined a sound for a generation, only to see its own foundations just crumble under the weight of its own success. Really, it's a story about art, ambition, and that incredibly fine line between being authentic and putting on a show. So, today we're going to dive deep into the entire journey of Arcade Fire. We're talking from their beginnings as these indie darlings in Montreal to becoming global superstars and then the crisis that followed. We're going to explore how they built this completely new sound, how they took over the world, and then what happened when a series of events just threatened to tear it all apart. Okay, so let's set the scene. Our story kicks off in the early 2000s, right in the middle of Montreal's super vibrant experimental music scene. The city was just this creative melting pot. And this is where Win Butler, this charismatic student from Texas, meets Regine Chassagne, an incredible multi-instrumentalist who actually had a background in medieval music. They had this shared vision that was honestly going to change the sound of indie rock forever. What they were trying to do was a complete 180 from the ironic, detached vibe that defined so much of indie rock at the time. You had to remember, this was the era of being cool and distant, but they wanted the opposite. They wanted huge emotions, grand, sweeping orchestrations, and a raw sincerity that felt almost dangerous. They weren't just trying to be a rock band. They wanted to create this big, orchestral, emotionally raw collective. Now, the early lineup was a little all over the place, but it eventually locked in around this core group you see right here. And at the absolute center of it all was the partnership, both creative and personal, of Win and Regine, who got married in 2003. Their connection wasn't just romantic, it was the bedrock of the whole project. It was the source of this immense creative energy, but it also provided this really crucial emotional stability for the band. And that title for their debut album, Funeral? Yeah, that's not a metaphor. While they were making it, several band members, including Win, Regine, and Richard Reed Parry, all lost close family members. And they poured all of that collective grief directly into the music. The result was an album that just felt so urgent, so cathartic, and 100% real. It was exactly the sound a generation hungry for some kind of authenticity was waiting for. And wow, did the world notice. Their rise was just meteoric. For their second album, Neon Bible, they literally bought and converted an old church and used its massive pipe organ to create this darker, much bigger sound. That album tackled these huge themes of paranoia and consumerism, and it totally cemented their status as one of the most important bands out there. So by 2010, you could argue they were the biggest indie band on the planet. Their next album, The Suburbs, the sprawling double album about modern life and memory, it hit #1. Not just in the US, but in the UK, in Canada, everywhere. This was their peak, both commercially and critically. It was that perfect moment where their artistic vision just perfectly lined up with what was happening in the culture. It was a masterpiece, and it basically put them in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in everyone's minds. And this slide right here, this just shows you how huge they'd become. We're at the 2011 Grammys, and look who they're up against for Album of the Year. On one side, you've got these global pop titans, Eminem, Lady Gaga, Katy Perry. And on the other side, this orchestral indie collective from Montreal. I mean, come on, nobody thought they had a prayer. And then they won. They actually won. The victory was so shocking that it launched this viral backlash, perfectly summed up by this phrase that was everywhere online. It was a real watershed moment because it showed this massive disconnect between the indie scene that had built them up and the mainstream audience that was just now figuring out who they were. But you know what? It was also a huge triumph for indie music. It was a sign that the old gatekeepers of the industry were starting to lose their grip. Okay, so after the Grammys, something kind of changed. Winning the industry's biggest award just put them on a totally different level, and they responded with their most ambitious project yet. Their 2013 album, Reflector, was this big pivot to a dance rock sound, full of Haitian rhythms. But its marketing campaign was a lot. It involved all these mysterious symbols and fake band names, and for some people, it just felt a little pretentious. This was really the first little crack in that carefully built image of sincerity. But the real fracture, the moment things really started to split, came in 2017 with Everything Now.
It was still a commercial hit, for sure, but its super aggressive, satirical marketing campaign and what a lot of critics called really inconsistent songwriting, well, it started to push away the very fans who had championed their sincerity just a decade earlier. I mean, the album had some brilliant moments, but it also felt like the band was kind of wrestling with its own legacy. And these critiques here showed just how divided everyone was.
All right, let's jump ahead to 2022. The band put out a new album, We, and it was really framed as this heartfelt return to their roots. But any excitement about the music was about to be completely overshadowed by a series of just devastating events that would absolutely shatter the band's public image. First, in March, Win's brother and a core member of the band, Will Butler, announced he was leaving after 18 years. For the fan base, this was a huge shock. Then, just 3 months after the album came out, Pitchfork published a detailed report with allegations of sexual misconduct against Win Butler from 4 different people. The news sent absolute shockwaves through the music world. Fans were just left reeling. And the fallout was immediate and it was severe. Radio stations in their home country of Canada started pulling their music from the playlists. And probably most famously, their opening act, the incredible artist Feist, left the tour after just 2 shows. She said she just couldn't continue given the report. The band's institutional support was starting to crumble, and their once devoted fan base felt, well, alienated and betrayed. The band decided to push forward into what really became the final act of this whole era. In 2025, they released a new album called Pink Elephant, a title that directly nodded to the unresolved controversy hanging over them. Musically, it was a really somber, introspective album, a world away from the anthems of their early years. It felt like it was being framed as this cathartic attempt at redemption, a way to heal. But that redemption, it just didn't connect. The album got pretty mixed reviews, and its commercial performance was an absolute disaster. I mean, just look at the contrast on this chart. It's staggering. A band that once topped the charts with every single release now failed to even chart on the main Billboard 200. It was a historic, shocking commercial failure, and a clear sign that the band had really lost that connection with their audience. And then came the most devastating news of all. In October of 2025, Win Butler and Regine Chisaga announced that they were separating after 22 years of marriage. That foundational partnership, the emotional and creative heart of Arcade Fire for more than 2 decades, was over. They promised the band would continue, but the central myth of the collective had been dismantled. For so many fans, this was truly the end of an era. And this slide just puts the whole crisis into such stark relief. While Win was facing all this personal and professional turmoil, his brother Will, who had left the band, remember, was achieving incredible new success. He won a Tony Award for his work on the hit Broadway play Stereophonic. Will's success was this powerful reminder of the immense talent that used to be part of Arcade Fire, and it raised some really difficult questions about the band's future without him. So this brings us to the big, looming question about Arcade Fire's future. The band that once sang about love and loss with such raw, real sincerity now has to navigate this massive loss at its very core. Can a creative vision actually survive when its foundational partnership has been completely dismantled? What happens when the fire that burned so incredibly bright is threatened by the collapse of its own institution? Well, only time will tell, but one thing is for sure, the story of Arcade Fire is far from over.